My name is Smith Oben. I have spent years listening to stories people are afraid to tell, stories whispered late at night, shared only when the world grows quiet. I don't chase fear for entertainment. I collect it because some experiences refuse to stay buried. What you are about to hear is not a legend passed down or a rumor shaped by time. It is a journey told exactly as it was lived, remembered piece by piece, long after it ended. I believe some roads are not meant to be traveled, and some vehicles are not meant to be boarded. Yet curiosity often speaks louder than caution. Tonight, I will guide you through one such journey, a ride that began as ordinary and slowly unraveled into something impossible to explain. Listen carefully. Some stories are not just told, they return with you. I boarded the bus thinking I was early. The digital clock above the ticket counter said 9:40 p.m., blinking faintly as if unsure of itself. The route board listed the destination in ordinary letters, the kind you stop noticing after years of travel. A 2-hour ride through the hills. I had done it before. I remember telling myself I would be home before midnight. The bus was already waiting. It looked older than it should have been, longer too, its windows tall and narrow, glass darkened, as if stained by years of night. No headlights were on, yet I could see it clearly. The door stood open, breathing out a smell that reminded me of damp earth and iron. And no one else was boarding. I hesitated, checking my phone. No signal. The time flickered and vanished, then returned wrong 9 hours 73 minutes p.m. before correcting itself. I laughed under my breath, blamed the cold, and stepped forward. The driver didn't look at me. He sat unnaturally straight, both hands on the wheel, his cap pulled low. The skin on his neck was grayish, like ash pressed into flesh. I said, "Ticket," but the word felt too loud in the bus's silence. He lifted one finger and pointed down the aisle. I walked in. The seats were mostly filled. At first glance, they looked like people, men, women, shapes hunched or upright, but something was off in the way mannequins are off. Stillness where there should be motion. Faces angled slightly away from the aisle, as if trained not to be seen. I chose an empty seat near the middle. As soon as I sat down, the doors closed with a sound like a held breath being released. The bus began moving without a jolt, without an engine's protest. The station lights slid away too smoothly, like a painted backdrop being pulled aside. I told myself not to stare. The man across the aisle wore a suit far too formal for a night bus. His hands rested on his knees, fingers long and pale. When I shifted, his head turned a fraction, not toward me, but toward where I had been a moment earlier. A woman 2 rows ahead rocked gently, though the road was smooth. Her reflection in the window lagged behind her movements, as if struggling to keep up. The bus climbed. Hills rose on either side, dark and layered, the road narrowing into a ribbon. Trees leaned inward, their branches knitting together overhead. The headlights came on suddenly, washing the forest in a dull yellow that seemed to stop short of the ground. I checked my watch. Still 9:40 p.m. I frowned, tapping the glass. Time had not moved. Or perhaps it had moved and taken something with it. The bus made its first stop without slowing. We were suddenly there. A stone gate loomed beside the road, half collapsed, vines strangling its pillars. Beyond it rose the silhouette of a castle, massive and wrong, its towers pressed too close together. The air felt colder, heavier, like stepping into water. The doors opened. 3 passengers stood. They moved as one, their steps perfectly aligned. As they passed me, I caught the smell again, earth, iron, something older. One of them brushed my shoulder. His touch was light, almost polite, yet my skin burned where he had been. The doors closed. The bus moved on. And no one spoke. Minutes or hours passed. My thoughts began to slide, losing their edges. The road twisted upward, then downward, then through tunnels carved directly into the mountain. In one cave, the walls glistened as if wet, and shapes clung to them like carvings that breathed. At the next stop, the bus halted beside a forest clearing lit by pale, floating lights. More passengers rose. Some left. Others boarded. The new ones did not look at the driver. They looked at me. Not directly. Never directly. Their attention brushed past me, circled me, pressed close without touching. I felt examined, weighed, Remember. I tried to stand. My legs obeyed slowly, like they were listening to instructions from somewhere else. I walked to the front and spoke, louder this time. "Excuse me, how long until the next stop?" The driver turned his head. His face was there, and not there. Features arranged correctly but lacking depth, like a mask worn too long. His eyes were dark hollows that reflected nothing. He spoke without opening his mouth. 2 hours, he said. I nodded, relief rushing through me. Then the bus clock chimed softly. It read day 1. And outside the window, the forest had begun to change, its trees thinning into shapes that looked disturbingly like waiting crowds. I woke to the sound of the bus breathing. That was the first thought that entered my mind, not that it moved or rattled, but that it breathed, slow and heavy, like an animal, asleep but aware of me. The windows were dark, darker than night should be, and when I tried to look outside, my reflection stared back too clearly, as if the glass preferred me to the world beyond it. I checked my phone again. No signal. No time. Just a dead screen reflecting my face, pale and unfamiliar, as though the last hour had already taken something from me. I told myself it was exhaustion. 2 hours on a night bus through the hills could do strange things to the mind. That was still the plan, still the lie I clung to. 2 hours. The other passengers hadn't moved since I boarded. I noticed it properly now. Not the obvious things, not the stiff postures or the silence, but the way their stillness didn't feel temporary. People shift without thinking. They breathe, scratch, sigh. These passengers did none of that. A woman in the seat ahead of me stared forward, her hair tied with a ribbon that hadn't fluttered once, despite the draft that brushed my face. An old man across the aisle held a newspaper open, though there were no pages. Just a blank gray sheet folded into the shape of news. I cleared my throat. The sound felt loud, invasive. No one reacted. At the front, the driver sat perfectly straight. I couldn't see his face in the mirror, only a dark hollow where it should have been, as if the reflection refused to complete him. His hands gripped the wheel, unmoving, yet the bus continued to climb the winding road as though guided by memory rather than touch. "We should have reached the pass by now," I said, more to myself than anyone else. The words fell into the aisle and didn't come back. That's when the bus slowed. Not a smooth deceleration, but a reluctant one, like it was being pulled backward by something unseen. Outside, shapes began to form, tall stone walls rising from the fog, jagged and ancient. A castle loomed on the cliffside, its towers broken, its windows glowing faintly like watchful eyes. I was certain there had been no castles on this route. I would have remembered. The bus stopped. The doors opened with a sigh that sounded far too relieved. And no one stood. No one spoke. Then, one by one, the passengers rose, not fluidly, but in segments, like puppets pulled by separate strings. They moved down the aisle without looking at me, their footsteps silent, their bodies brushing past as though I were no more solid than smoke. When they stepped off the bus, the air rushed in, cold and smelling of damp stone and old earth. I watched them disappear into the fog, heading toward the castle without hesitation, without fear. I stayed seated. The driver finally turned his head. Up close, there was a suggestion of a face, features hinted at but never fully there, like a memory half forgotten. When he spoke, his voice didn't come from his mouth. It came from everywhere at once. "This is a stop," he said. "I didn't ask to get off," I replied. My voice shook, and I hated it. "You did," he said calmly. "When you boarded, I boarded a bus to reach the valley. 2 hours." The driver tilted his head, considering me the way one might consider a broken clock. "Time stretches for the living," he said. "It collapses for the dead." My heart hammered. "I'm not dead." A pause. Then, "Not yet." The doors remained open. The fog thickened, curling its fingers around the steps, waiting. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang deep, slow, and patient. The driver faced forward again. "If you stay," he said, "the journey continues. And if I leave?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I stood, my legs unsteady, and stepped into the cold. The moment my foot touched the ground, the bus doors closed behind me with finality. The engine started, and without another glance, The bus rolled forward and vanished into the fog, as if it had never existed at all. I was alone before the castle, and somehow, impossibly, I knew this was only the first stop, and that the 2-hour journey I remembered had already become something much longer. The bus should have stopped by now. That thought had been repeating itself in my head for a long time, long enough that it began to lose meaning. When I first boarded, the driver had said the journey would take 2 hours. His voice had been calm, hollow, like sound passing through an empty tunnel. I had checked my watch then, more out of habit than caution. It was a little past 6 in the evening. Now, the watch lay useless in my palm. The hands had stopped moving altogether, frozen between minutes, as if time itself had decided not to follow us where we were going. Outside the windows, the scenery no longer flowed. It watched. The road curved endlessly through hills that rose like the backs of sleeping animals. Sometimes the bus passed between stone structures, ruined castles perched on cliffs, their towers broken and hollow, windows gaping like open mouths. Other times the road narrowed into forest paths where branches leaned close, scratching the glass softly, persistently, as if testing for weakness. Inside the bus, the passengers sat exactly as they had since the beginning. No one spoke. No one shifted. Their stillness was not peaceful, it was deliberate. I tried not to look at them, but the effort only made my awareness sharper. The man across the aisle had no reflection in the window beside him. The woman near the back held a child who never blinked. A tall figure stood in the aisle now, though I was certain no one had stood up. Its feet did not quite touch the floor, and yet the bus did not react to its weight. The driver kept driving. His hands were long, fingers wrapped too tightly around the steering wheel. Every so often, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to something I could not hear. I wanted to ask him where we were going. I wanted to demand that he stop the bus. But the words stayed trapped behind my teeth, heavy with fear. The first stop came without warning. The bus slowed near a massive stone gate carved directly into the mountainside. Symbols were etched into its surface, circles within circles, lines that twisted back into themselves. They hurt to look at, not because they were sharp or grotesque, but because they felt wrong, as if they described something the human mind was never meant to understand. The bus doors opened with a sigh. Several passengers stood up at once. They moved smoothly, gliding rather than walking, and filed out into the cold, colorless air. As they passed me, I caught fragments of sensation, cold hands brushing my arm, the faint smell of damp earth, whispers that slid through my thoughts without forming words. One of them paused beside me. Its face was close now, too close. The skin was stretched thin, eyes sunken deep into shadow. Its mouth opened slightly, and for a moment I thought it might speak. Instead, something else happened. I felt memories slipping, small, insignificant ones at first. The sound of my mother's voice, the name of my childhood street. They drained away like water through cracked fingers. I gasped, clutching my head. The thing moved on. The doors closed. The bus pulled away, leaving the stone gate behind. I realized then that the seats once occupied by those passengers were not empty. They had never been empty. Shadows sat there now, pressed into the shape of bodies, as if the bus remembered them even after they were gone. The driver glanced at me in the mirror. His eyes were completely black. "Still with us?" he said quietly. I didn't answer. The road climbed higher, winding through fog that thickened until the world beyond the windows vanished completely. Time lost its edges. My hunger came and went without warning. Sometimes I felt exhausted beyond reason. Other times my body buzzed with unnatural alertness, as though sleep were no longer allowed here. We stopped again. This time, the bus rolled into a clearing surrounded by trees so tall their tops disappeared into darkness. In the center stood a structure half buried in the earth, a castle sunk into the forest floor, its walls cracked, roots growing through stone. The air outside shimmered, heavy with something unspoken. More passengers disembarked. One by one, they turned back to look at the bus, at me. Their expressions were not cruel. They were patient. Knowing I understood then that these were not random stops. This was not a route. It was a procession. When the bus moved again, I was shaking. I forced myself to stand, gripping the seat backs as I made my way forward. Every step felt like walking against deep water. The standing figure in the aisle watched me pass, its head rotating slightly, joints moving in ways that made my stomach turn. I stopped just behind the driver. "Please," I said. My voice sounded thin, fragile. "How long has it been?" He did not look at me. "Longer than you think," he replied. "How much longer?" I asked. "It was supposed to be 2 hours." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "It still is," he said. "For some of you." I felt a sudden, crushing certainty that if I sat down again, I might never stand up. That the bus would claim me the way it had claimed the others, not by force, but by erasure. The driver reached forward and adjusted something on the dashboard. Symbols flared briefly, glowing the same sickly color as the carvings on the gate. "You notice more now," he said. "That means the journey has begun. Where are you taking us?" I demanded. "To where you already are," he answered. The road descended sharply. The bus rattled as it entered a cave mouth wide enough to swallow mountains. Inside, the walls pulsed faintly, as if breathing. Shapes moved just beyond the reach of the headlights. I heard whispers again, clearer this time, brushing against my thoughts. Names, some were mine. Panic surged through me. I backed away from the driver, stumbling into the aisle. The bus lurched, throwing me into a seat. The standing figure was suddenly beside me, impossibly close. "You're early," it murmured. "For what?" I asked, my heart hammering. It tilted its head, considering, or remembering. It said. The cave opened on the other side into a vast valley lit by a dead, gray sky. Castles dotted the hills, like monuments to forgotten wars. Roads branched in impossible directions, intersecting and looping back on themselves. The bus rolled on. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass and finally accepted the truth I had been circling since the first stop. This was no longer a journey through space. It was a journey through layers of memory, of identity, of whatever lay beneath being human. Somewhere along the road, 2 hours had become 2 days, and I was no longer sure which part of me had been traveling before, and which part was being carried now. By the time I realized the bus had stopped obeying time, the windows had already forgotten how to show daylight. I checked my phone again, not because I expected it to work, but because the habit felt human. The screen lit up, dim and apologetic, showing a time that made no sense. 2 hours had passed since I boarded. That was all. Yet my body felt as if it had slept badly, woken, slept again, and woken into a deeper exhaustion. My eyes burned. My thoughts dragged, slow and sticky, as if pulled through syrup. The road outside had narrowed into a ribbon of stone, winding upward through hills that leaned too close. Rock faces loomed like frozen waves, and the bus climbed them with a low, steady groan that felt almost like breathing. Not the mechanical whining I expected, but something deeper, patient, alive. I noticed then that no one else shifted in their seats. The passenger sat perfectly still. Too still. No coughing. No stretching. No irritated sighs. Their faces were turned forward, all of them, eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. The old woman with the veil hadn't moved since the last bend. The child hadn't blinked. The man with the hollow cheek sat with his hands folded neatly in his lap, fingers interlocked, as if in prayer. I tried to swallow. My throat was dry. "Excuse me," I said, my voice sounding loud and thin inside the bus. "How much longer?" No one turned. The driver didn't respond either. His reflection in the front glass was clearer now. Too clear. His eyes were open wide, unblinking, pupils pale, almost translucent. His mouth curved into something that might once have been a smile. The bus lurched slightly, and then slowed. Stone walls rose on both sides of the road, carved and stacked with unnatural precision. Torches flared to life as we passed, igniting one by one without flame or spark, bathing the path in a dull orange glow. Ahead, gates appeared tall, iron, twisted into shapes that hurt to look at for too long. The bus rolled through them. Beyond the gates stood a castle. Not the kind from books or postcards. This one crouched against the mountain like a parasite, its towers uneven, its windows narrow and deep, glowing faintly from within. The stone was blackened, veined with something darker, as if the structure had grown rather than been built. The bus stopped. The doors hissed open. Cold air poured inside, carrying the smell of wet earth, old smoke, and something faintly metallic. Still, no one moved. Then, one by one, the passengers stood. They didn't walk toward the door. They glided, feet barely lifting, body swaying in perfect rhythm. As they passed me, I felt it a drop in temperature, sharp and sudden, like stepping into a shadow that didn't belong to anything. When the child passed, he looked at me, just for a moment. His eyes were not empty anymore. They were full, crowded with depth, like wells that had never known light. I couldn't breathe until he was gone. The bus emptied, seat by seat, until only I remained. The driver finally turned his head. "You may step out," he said calmly. His voice carried no echo, no warmth. "This stop is necessary. I didn't ask to stop here," I said. My hands were clenched so tightly my nails bit into my palms. "You did," he replied. "When you boarded, I just needed a ride. That is always how it begins." The silence stretched. Somewhere inside the castle, a bell rang low, hollow, and wrong. The sound vibrated through my bones. "Will they come back?" I asked. The driver's smile widened, just enough to show that his teeth were not quite the right shape. "Some do." The doors remained open. I don't know why I stood. Fear should have pinned me to the seat, but something else pulled me forward. Curiosity, maybe, or that terrible human instinct to seek meaning even when meaning promises pain. The moment my foot touched the ground outside, the doors slammed shut behind me. The bus pulled away without sound, rolling back the way it had come, its red lights fading into the mountain fog. I stood alone before the castle gates, my breath fogging in the cold air. The gates opened on their own. Inside, the courtyard was vast and empty. Statues lined the walls, figures frozen in expressions of awe, terror, pleading. Their eyes were too detailed, their mouths caught mid-word. I told myself they were stone. I told myself many things. A door at the far end creaked open. Light spilled out, yellow and weak. I stepped inside. The hall was long, its ceiling lost in shadow. Candles floated in the air, unheld, their flame steady despite the drought. At the center stood a table, set for one. A figure waited at the far end, tall, thin, wrapped in a cloak that seemed to absorb the light around it. "You are late," it said, without accusation. "I didn't know I was expected." A pause. "No one ever does." It gestured to the chair. I didn't want to sit. I sat anyway. As soon as I did, the doors slammed shut behind me. Locks turned. Chains slid into place. The figure moved closer. Its face emerged from the hood slowly, like something being remembered rather than revealed. Features formed, dissolved, reformed, never settling. "Time passes differently here," it said. "You have been traveling longer than you believe." "How long?" I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. 2 days, it answered softly. My heart pounded. "That's impossible." "On your road?" it said. "Yes." The candles flickered. "You will rest here," the figure continued. "Then you will continue your journey." "Back to the bus?" A sound like a laugh, dry and distant. "Forward," it corrected. The table began to fill on its own, plates appearing, cups filling with dark liquid. The smell made my stomach twist, not with hunger, but with memory. Old memories. Forgotten ones. "Eat," the figure said. "You'll need strength." I stared at the food, at my shaking hands, at the door that would not open. Somewhere, far beyond the stone walls, I imagined a road that still obeyed hours and minutes. A life where buses went where they promised. I lifted the cup, and as the liquid touched my lips, I understood that the journey had only just begun. I stopped checking my watch after what I believed was the 4th hour. Not because time had stopped, but because it had begun to feel dishonest. Every glance gave me a different answer. Sometimes the hands hadn't moved at all. Sometimes they had leapt forward so far that my chest tightened in panic. The bus kept moving regardless, its engine humming like a tired throat clearing itself again and again. By then, the road had changed. The smooth highway I remembered boarding on was long gone. The bus climbed a narrow, winding path that cut through hills piled one over another, like the spines of sleeping animals. Fog pressed against the windows so closely it felt deliberate, as if something outside was listening to our breath. The passengers remained silent, but their presence felt heavier now, closer. I could sense them without looking like cold spots in a room. I made the mistake of turning my head. The woman behind me no longer pretended to breathe. Her chest was still. Her eyes were open, staring not at me, but through me, as though I were just another layer of mist. Her skin had taken on a grayish translucence, veins like faint cracks in old glass. When she smiled, it was slow and uncertain, as if she was remembering how. "You're still counting hours," she said. I didn't ask how she knew. My mouth was dry, my tongue useless. "It's been longer than that," she continued, her voice layered, echoing slightly out of sync with itself. "It always is." The bus jolted suddenly, throwing me back into my seat. Ahead, the driver turned his head just enough for me to see his reflection in the cracked mirror above the windshield. His eyes were black, not empty, but full crowded, like windows lit in a city at night. "We don't measure time the same way here," he said calmly. He hadn't raised his voice, yet every passenger heard him. I knew because they all shifted at once. "You boarded with the living hours. You travel now with the dead ones." The road opened onto a plateau, and the fog thinned just enough for me to see what waited there. A castle rose from the rock as though it had been carved directly out of it. Towers leaned at impossible angles, their windows glowing faintly. There were no lights, no torches, yet the place was illuminated, as if the stone itself remembered fire. The bus slowed and stopped. An announcement. No doors opening sound. Just stillness. Several passengers stood. Their movements were stiff at first, then smoother, like joints remembering freedom. As they passed me, I noticed something I hadn't before. None of them cast reflections in the glass. Where their faces should have been mirrored, there was only darkness, or sometimes places that didn't match the inside of the bus at all: rooms, hallways, staircases. "You don't get off here," the driver said without looking back. "Not yet." The doors closed again. The bus pulled away, leaving the castle behind. As we descended, I realized something that made my stomach drop. The castle hadn't grown smaller. It hadn't faded into distance. It remained the same size, watching, as if distance didn't apply to it. I leaned forward, gripping the seat ahead of me. "How long has it been?" I asked. My voice sounded wrong, thinner than it should have. The driver finally turned, fully this time. His face was not decayed, not monstrous. That somehow made it worse. He looked like a man who had once lived a very ordinary life. "Since you boarded?" he asked. 2 days. "That's impossible," I whispered. "The ticket said 2 hours." He smiled, not cruelly, but with something like sympathy. "So did mine." The bus entered a forest so dense that branches scraped along the sides like fingers testing a locked door. Shadows bent in unnatural ways, stretching across the road and pulling back again. Faces appeared briefly between the trees, then vanished. Some looked curious. Others looked relieved, as if seeing the bus meant they didn't have to remember something anymore. I felt exhaustion seep into my bones, deep and sudden. My thoughts slowed, thickened. The air inside the bus grew colder, carrying the scent of damp earth and old stone. A child's voice spoke from somewhere near the front. "You're fading," it said matter-of-factly. I looked and saw a boy no older than 10, sitting alone. His feet didn't touch the floor. His eyes were wrong, too old, carrying something like centuries. "What happens when I do?" I asked. He shrugged. "You stop asking questions. That's when the journey gets easier." The bus climbed again, toward caves carved into the hillsides like open mouths. I felt myself slipping, not asleep, not awake, caught between moments. As my eyes closed, I realized the most terrifying part wasn't where the bus was taking me. It was the growing fear that, when it finally stopped, I wouldn't want to leave. I stopped counting the turns somewhere after the road vanished. That's the first honest thing I can say about that night. One moment, the bus was climbing a narrow hill road, headlights cutting through fog like dull knives. The next, there was no road at all, only a gray slope falling away into nothing. Yet the bus continued forward as if wheels no longer mattered. I didn't shout. I didn't stand up. Fear had settled into me like a second spine, keeping me rigid. The driver's hands never moved from the wheel. I could see them clearly now, too long, joints bending in places they shouldn't, fingers gripping the rim with a patience that felt ancient. The rearview mirror reflected his eyes again. This time they stayed on me. "You're still awake," he said. It wasn't a question. I swallowed. My mouth felt full of dust. "How long until the stop?" He smiled, and the bus slowed, not by braking, but by the world around us changing. The fog thinned. Shapes emerged. Stone towers rose from the hills like broken teeth. Castles, not ruins, these were occupied. Light burned behind narrow windows. Banners hummed limp in air that refused to move. The bus rolled through an iron gate that opened on its own, hinges screaming without sound. As we passed the first castle, every passenger turned their heads at once. I felt it before I saw it, the pressure in my skull, as if invisible fingers were prying memories loose. The woman beside me let out a soft sigh. Her face smoothed, emptied. For a moment, I saw a younger version of her reflected in the glass, standing in a kitchen that wasn't here, holding a child that never existed. The bus didn't stop. "Some of them get off there," the driver said calmly. "Others are only passing through." "How long have I been on this bus?" I asked. He considered. 2 hours. The clock above the windshield flickered. I stared at it until my eyes burned. It read 3:17 a.m. I remembered boarding the bus just after sunset. The road descended sharply. Forests closed in, trees bent inward as though listening. Their branches scratched the sides of the bus, not like wood, but like nails dragged slowly across glass. That's when the whispering started. Not voices breathing. Dozens of breaths, out of sync, filling the aisle. The man across from me leaned forward. His mouth opened, impossibly wide, and a breath poured out that smelled of wet earth and old bones. "Ticket," he whispered. I clutched the paper in my pocket. I didn't know when it had gotten there, but I knew better than to lose it. The bus jolted. We stopped. The doors opened onto a cave mouth carved into the mountain itself. Symbols lined the stone, circles inside circles, scratched deep, as if done by hands that didn't tire. One by one, several passengers stood. As they passed me, I felt cold brush my arm, and with it came flashes, falls, screams swallowed by rock, the sensation of being buried while still alive. I bit down hard enough to taste blood, just to stay inside myself. When the doors closed again, the bus felt lighter. "How many stops left?" I asked, my voice barely holding together. The driver adjusted the mirror. His eyes softened, just a little. "Depends," he said, "on how much of you remains." The bus lurched forward, deeper into the hills, and I finally understood the truth I'd been avoiding. This journey wasn't taking me somewhere. It was taking pieces of me away. And it had only just begun. The bus no longer rattled the way it had before. Its movement became smooth, almost gliding, as if the road beneath us had turned soft or unreal. I noticed this only because my stomach felt wrong, like when an elevator drops too fast. Outside the window, the hills leaned closer, their dark shapes pressing in as though curious about what we carried inside. I tried to focus on breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. That was when I realized I could no longer hear my breath. The sound was there in my head, but the air felt thick, unwilling to move. Around me, the passenger sat perfectly still. No shifting, no sighs, no impatience. Their eyes reflected the dim interior lights, glassy and distant, fixed on something I could not see. The driver finally spoke. "We are ahead of time," he said, without turning around. My heart jumped at the sound of his voice. It was calm, almost polite, but it carried an echo, as if multiple voices were layered beneath it. I opened my mouth to ask what he meant, but the word stuck. Ahead of what time? 2 hours? 2 days? My watch was useless now. The screen had gone black sometime after the second stop, though I was sure I had fully charged it. The bus slowed and turned onto a narrow road carved into the side of the mountain. Stone walls rose on one side, and on the other there was nothing but darkness. No stars. No distant lights. Just a depth that made my eyes ache when I stared too long. We stopped in front of a structure that looked like a castle only in silhouette. Its towers were uneven, broken, as if time had chewed on them and grown bored halfway through. The doors opened, and a cold wind rushed in, carrying a smell of damp stone and old smoke. One stood up. The driver waited. One by one, the passengers began to fade. There was no dramatic disappearance, no flash or sound. They simply thinned, like fog under sunlight, until the seats were empty. I was left alone, gripping the edge of my seat, unable to decide whether I wanted them gone or back. "You may look," the driver said. Against my better judgment, I stepped off the bus. The ground beneath my feet felt solid, reassuringly real. From the open doorway of the castle, figures watched me, shapes that suggested people, but refused to fully become them. I felt their attention like weight on my chest. "Why are we here?" I asked, my voice small in the open air. "To remember," the driver replied. "And to be remembered." The doors closed behind me with a soft hiss. The bus pulled away, disappearing around the curve of the mountain road, leaving me standing between the silent castle and the endless dark. That was when I understood something that made my knees weaken. This was no longer a journey I was observing. It was one I had been claimed by. The castle accepted me without resistance. The doors did not creak or groan. They simply opened, as if they had been expecting my hand on the stone handle. Inside, the air was warmer than outside, heavy with the smell of dust and something faintly sweet, like burned incense. My footsteps echoed too clearly, each one repeating itself a moment longer than it should have. The hall was enormous, yet strangely narrow, stretching forward in a way that made distance hard to judge. Along the walls hung faded tapestries. When I looked closely, I realized they were not scenes of battles or kings, but journeys, roads winding through forests, rivers cutting across plains, a bus painted again and again in different styles. In every tapestry, the bus was full. I heard voices then, soft at first, like murmuring through walls. I followed the sound, my pulse loud in my ears, until I reached a chamber lit by a pale blue glow. The light did not come from torches or windows. It seemed to float, gathering in the air itself. Figures stood in a circle. They were more solid than the passengers on the bus, but still wrong in subtle ways. Their shadows moved independently. Their faces lagged a second behind their expressions. They turned toward me together. "A living traveler," one of them said, its voice careful, as though testing a language it had not used in a long time. "I want to go back," I said immediately. "I just got on a bus. That's all." A ripple passed through the circle, something like quiet laughter. Another figure stepped forward. "So did we." They showed me fragments of their stories, not with words, but with images pressed directly into my mind. A woman boarding a late-night bus after an argument. A man escaping rain in a mountain town. A boy clutching a ticket he did not remember buying. Each journey was meant to be short. Each had stretched, bent, and broken. "The driver collects moments," the first figure said. "People caught between leaving and arriving." My chest tightened. "Then why am I here? Why not wherever you are?" "Because you still notice time," it replied. "You still resist." The castle trembled faintly, as if responding to those words. Somewhere deep within, a low horn sounded, slow and mournful. The figures began to fade, retreating into the walls, into the stone itself. "Go," one of them whispered as it vanished. "Before you forget how." A door appeared where there had been none before. I ran through it without thinking, down a spiral staircase that seemed to unwind forever. At the bottom, the forest waited, twisted trees, mist curling around their roots. And there, impossibly, was the bus. Its headlights flickered on as I approached. The door opened with a familiar hiss. Inside, new passengers sat in silence. I froze when I saw that one seat was empty, my seat. The driver met my eyes in the mirror. "You are late," he said gently. As I stepped back onto the bus, a terrible understanding settled over me. The journey had not paused while I wandered the castle. It had only widened. The doors closed. The bus moved forward. and I no longer knew how much of me was still trying to get home. I noticed the silence first. Not the absence of sound, there was always the low hum of the bus, the faint scrape of branches against glass, but the absence of intention. The silence felt settled, as if it had decided to stay. When I sat back in my seat, it welcomed me like an old habit. The passengers were different now. They still looked almost human, but the effort felt thinner. Faces blurred at the edges. Hands rested in laps that didn't quite exist. A man across from me blinked once, slowly, and when his eyes opened again, they reflected a place I had never seen: stone steps leading downward into black water. I realized with a quiet jolt that no one new had boarded. Since the castle, the bus had not stopped to collect anyone. It only moved forward, deeper into hills that no longer followed geography. Peaks rose and folded back into themselves. Forests appeared where valleys should have been. Caves opened and closed like mouths deciding whether to speak. "How much longer?" I asked. The driver didn't answer immediately. The road curved sharply, and for a moment the bus seemed to tilt sideways without falling. Outside, I saw another bus far below us, moving in the opposite direction, its windows glowing faintly. It vanished before I could decide if it was real. "At least until you stop asking that," the driver said at last. My reflection in the window startled me. My face looked the same, but my eyes didn't. There was something behind them now, distance, maybe, or depth. I raised a hand, and my reflection lagged behind by half a second. The bus slowed near a forest clearing. In Oak Castle this time. No gates. Just trees standing in a perfect circle, their trunks pale and smooth, branches interlocked overhead like ribs. The doors opened, and cold air spilled in. One passenger stood. It was the boy. He stepped into the aisle and turned to face me. Up close, his face was unsettlingly calm, like someone who had already accepted every ending. "This is where I get off," he said. "What's here?" I asked. He considered the question seriously. "What's left?" Before I could say anything else, he stepped off the bus and walked into the trees. The forest parted for him, then closed again, seamless and final. The door shut. Something shifted inside me, light, but unmistakable. A weight I hadn't known I was carrying loosened, just a little. "You felt that?" the driver said. I nodded. "What was it?" "Release," he replied. "Or loss. They feel similar." The bus climbed higher, the air thinning until my ears rang. The remaining passengers seemed to fade further, their outlines softening, their presence more suggestion than substance. I wondered how many of them had once asked the same questions I was asking now. I leaned my head against the glass and closed my eyes. For a moment, just a moment, I remembered the station, the blinking clock, the smell of fuel and dust. I remembered thinking I was early. When I opened my eyes again, the clock above the windshield flickered. Day 2. And beneath it, faint but unmistakable, another word appeared, etched into the glass like a promise or a warning. Returning. I didn't know whether that meant I was going home. Or whether the bus was bringing me back to something I had already left behind. The word returning stayed with me long after the clock dimmed again. I tried to decide what it meant, and that alone frightened me. Earlier, the idea of returning home, normal roads, ordinary time would have filled me with desperate hope. Now it felt distant, theoretical, like remembering a place from a dream you're no longer sure you ever visited. The bus moved through a stretch of land that looked unfinished. Hills rose and stopped abruptly, as if someone had abandoned the idea halfway through. Trees grew without patterns. Forests ended in straight lines. The sky above us was neither night nor day, just a flat, colorless expanse that offered no sense of direction. The passengers were fewer now. Where there had once been full rows, there were gaps, empty seats that felt louder than voices. In some of them, impressions remained, faint dips in the cushions shaped like bodies that had forgotten themselves. I caught myself wondering what I looked like when I wasn't paying attention. My reflection answered before I could stop thinking about it. The glass showed me sitting upright, hands folded in my lap, calm. Too calm. My eyes were open, but there was something behind them now, something patient. When I shifted, the reflection smiled a moment too late. I looked away. The driver hummed quietly, a low sound without melody. I realized I had heard it before, not on this bus, but somewhere else. A memory stirred and complete. A ride home long ago. Late evening. The same hum from a man behind the wheel who hadn't spoken much. "Have we met?" I asked suddenly. The humming stopped. "Many times," the driver said. My chest tightened. "Before the bus?" A pause. Longer than usual. "Before the question," he replied. The road dipped sharply, and the bus descended into a valley swallowed by forest. This one was different from the others. The trees were thinner, their bark pale and smooth, almost white. Faces appeared briefly in the wood grain as we passed, eyes opening and closing, mouths forming words I couldn't hear. The bus slowed. "No," I said, gripping the seat. "Not another stop." "It isn't," the driver said gently. "Not for you." The bus rolled on, leaving the forest behind. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by something worse: disappointment. I didn't understand it, but I felt it clearly. Part of me had expected to be taken, to be released. The realization made me feel hollow. "You're changing," the driver said. "That's normal." "I don't want to," I said. "That's also normal." Ahead, the road straightened for the first time since I boarded. It stretched forward into a pale distance, empty and quiet. No castles, no caves, just road. I felt my heartbeat slow. "Is this the way back?" I asked. The driver's reflection met my eyes. For the first time, I saw something unmistakably human there: fatigue. "It's away," he said. The clock flickered again. No words this time. Just numbers, unstable, sliding back and forth between hours and days. I watched them until they blurred. As the bus moved forward, I understood something with terrible clarity. Returning didn't mean undoing the journey. It meant carrying it with me. And I wasn't sure there would be room for both who I was before and who I was becoming. The road ahead stayed straight for longer than it should have. That alone unsettled me more than the twisted hills and impossible forests. Straight roads promised destinations. They suggested logic, order, an ending that could be reached if you just stayed seated long enough. I had learned by now that the bus disliked such ideas. The passengers were nearly gone. Only 3 remained besides me. Their shapes were faint, like pencil sketches left out in the rain. One sat with his head bowed, hands clasped, whispering something that never quite became words. Another stared out the window, eyes reflecting a sunrise that wasn't there. The third had no face at all, just a smooth suggestion of one, as if the bus had forgotten the details. I wondered which of us would be next to leave. The driver adjusted the mirror. "You're closer now," he said. "To what?" I asked. He hesitated. That alone felt like a crack in the world. "To choosing," he replied. The bus slowed. Not stopped, slowed, like it was giving me time to think. Outside, the landscape shifted again. The road split into 2 paths ahead. One led down into a valley filled with pale light, soft and quiet. The other climbed sharply into darkness, where shapes moved against the sky like distant towers. My chest tightened. "You never said there were choices." "There always are," the driver said. "Passengers just stopped noticing them." The faceless figure stood. As it passed me, I felt a sudden emptiness, like forgetting a word you've known all your life. It stepped off the bus when we reached the split, dissolving into the lighted path without a sound. Point 2 left. "Where did it go?" I asked. "Forward," the driver said. "The way that feels easiest." "And the other road?" He glanced at me. "The one that remembers you." The bus paused between the paths. The engine idled, low and patient. I realized then that this was the first time it had waited for me. I thought of the station, the ticket in my pocket that I no longer remembered buying, the promise of 2 hours. I thought of how much had been taken, quietly, without pain, how many memories now felt thin, unreliable. "I don't want to disappear," I said. The driver nodded. "Then you won't. But I don't want to stay like this either. That," he said softly, "is the difficult road." The bus turned, not toward the light, but toward the climb. Darkness closed around us as the road rose steeply. The remaining passengers faded, one by one, until only I remained. The bus felt smaller now. Quieter. Almost intimate. The clock above the windshield flickered one last time. 2 hours. I laughed a short, broken sound. That's a lie. The driver smiled, tired but genuine. It always was. As the bus climbed into the dark, I understood the final truth of the journey. Not everyone who boards is meant to arrive. Some are meant to return, and some like me are meant to remember the road forever. The bus slowed one last time. There was no dramatic jolt, no screech of brakes. It was more like a long breath being released. The road beneath us flattened, smoothing into something familiar, too familiar. Streetlights appeared in the distance, their glow soft and imperfect, flickering the way real lights do. My chest tightened at the sight of them. Normality felt unreal now. The driver eased the bus forward, and for the first time since I boarded, I recognized the road. Not clearly, not confidently, but enough to hurt. Cracked asphalt. A bent signpost. A low building with a shutter half closed, its paint peeling in a way memory exaggerates. My stop. The bus came to rest. The engine didn't turn off. It idled quietly, like it was waiting to see what I would do. I stood slowly, half expecting my legs to give out. They didn't. My body felt lighter than it should have, as if parts of me had been carefully removed and replaced with silence. I walked down the aisle, every step echoing too loudly in the empty bus.at. The door. I hesitated. If I get off? I asked, not turning around. Will I remember? The driver didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than it had ever been. You'll remember enough, he said, and forget enough. That's how returning works. I turned to face him. For the first time, he looked old, not ancient, tired, like someone who had driven the same road too many times, watching the same faces make the same choices. Will I see you again? I asked. He smiled, and this time, there was no wrongness in it. Only if you need to. The doors opened. Cold night air rushed in, sharp and clean, carrying sounds I hadn't heard in what felt like years. Distant traffic, a dog barking, the hum of electricity. I stepped down onto the pavement. The moment my feet touched the ground, the bus doors closed. I turned back. The bus was already pulling away, its lights dimming, its shape thinning as it moved down the road. It didn't vanish suddenly. It simply became less important, like a memory you stop reaching for. Then it was gone. I stood there for a long time. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with shaking hands. The screen lit up easily this time. 8:12 p.m. 2 hours after I had boarded. Messages waited. Missed calls. The world had continued perfectly well without me. I walked home. Everything felt the same. My apartment door stuck the way it always had. The light switch flickered before turning on. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my hands, half expecting them to fade. They didn't. That night, I dreamed of roads that never ended and buses that never stopped. I woke up knowing things I couldn't explain: how castles breathe when no one is watching, how forests remember footsteps, how time can stretch without breaking. Sometimes, when I take late buses now, I watch the driver's reflection in the mirror a little too closely. Sometimes, I notice empty seats that feel occupied. Sometimes, 2 hours pass and feel longer than they should. And every so often, usually just before sleep, I hear an engine idling somewhere far away, patient and familiar, waiting, not for everyone, just for those who remember the journey. Months passed before I accepted that the journey had truly ended. At first, I measured time obsessively. I checked clocks the way someone checks for a pulse, afraid the hours might suddenly stretch or collapse again. Morning followed night correctly. Buses arrived when they were supposed to. People complained about delays that lasted minutes, not days. The world behaved itself, and that frightened me more than the silence ever had. I returned to my routines, but they felt rehearsed, like lines spoken on a stage after the audience has gone home. Friends asked if I was tired. I said yes. They asked if something was wrong. I said no. Both answers were true in ways I could not explain. Some memories refused to settle. Certain roads made my chest tighten. Forests, even small ones, felt too aware. When I heard engines idling late at night, My body reacted before my mind did, a quiet readiness settling into my muscles, as if I were expected somewhere else. I began to understand that the journey hadn't followed me home, it had changed how I occupied the world. I tried once to find the route again. I went back to the station where I remembered boarding, though I couldn't be sure it was the same one. The benches were newer, the lights brighter. No one else seemed to notice anything unusual. I waited through 3 late buses, watching each driver carefully. None of them looked back at me in the mirror the way he had. Relief and disappointment arrived together. Over time, the sharpness of the experience dulled, but it never vanished. It became a layer beneath ordinary life, thin but constant. I noticed it in strangers who stared a second too long at passing buses, in people who hesitated before stepping aboard, as if listening for a sound only they could hear. Some of them never got on. Some did. I wondered, often, which kind I was now. One night, months later, I dreamed I was sitting alone on a familiar bus. The seats were empty, the road straight and endless. The driver did not speak. He only nodded once, as if acknowledging that I had kept my promise to remember, but not to follow. When I woke, the dream stayed with me longer than most. Not as fear, but as something steadier. Acceptance, maybe. I no longer believe the bus was a punishment, nor do I believe it was a gift. It was a crossing, one that exists for those who step into a space between leaving and arriving, between wanting to escape and being willing to stay. Some journeys are not meant to take you somewhere new. Some exist only to show you how easily time, identity, and certainty can loosen their grip. I still take buses. I still choose window seats. And every so often, when the road is quiet and the lights blur just right, I feel that familiar pause, as if the world itself is deciding whether to continue normally or turn somewhere else entirely. When that happens, I breathe. I stay, and I am grateful that, this time, the journey lets me.